everyone. I'm Sister Vassa, and live from Vienna, Austria, it's Saturday morning. Today, I'm excited to introduce to you our guest. It is Dr. Alexandra Filippakis, who is a neurologist, attending neurologist, and director of the MS Clinic at Wentworth Douglas Hospital in Dover and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Alexandra will be discussing with us some medical ethics issues with which she deals every day as a neurologist who deals with death and dying, and also very difficult and intense work hours. So she'll be talking to us what it's like to juggle the life of an Orthodox woman who also happens to be a chanter in her church. She belongs to the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese and is a chanter in her church. So stick around because we will have a lot of interesting topics to discuss with Alexandra. But let me tell you a little bit more about her. As I already said, she is a chanter at Holy Apostles Greek Orthodox Church in Haverhill, Massachusetts. She is a fellow of the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, a member of American Academy of Neurology, and also of other very prestigious professional organizations. And she is the happy wife of another Dr. Filippakis. Dr. Harry Filippakis is also a scientist and instructor at Harvard Medical School. And these two met at Tufts Medical Center. Now, about Alexandra's biography and education, let me tell you that she was born in Boston to immigrant Greek Orthodox parents. She is deeply influenced, as she tells me, by a very pious yaya, or grandmother, who has been chanting hymns with Alexandra since her childhood, and she still does. Her yaya took her to every church service when she was a child, told her stories about the lives of the saints, and would pray with her regularly. Alexandra played the organ in her Greek Orthodox church in her high school and college years. Yes, many Greek Orthodox churches, well, I don't know if it's many, I don't know the statistics, but I experienced it several times and actually found it quite nice. Did I find it strange? I did, but who's asking me, right? Anyway, there you have it. Don't watch the show if you don't want to know what I think. I don't have to be rude to my viewers, right? Sorry, people. You know I love you. All right, so let's move on here. Alexandra attended Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. Then she went on to get her undergraduate degree in German. Yes, she is fluent in German. And also in pre-med at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. She received her master's in science and neuroscience from Brandeis University and her doctor of osteopathic medicine from the New England College of Osteopathic Medicine. She did her residency and fellowship training. This is no easy time for anyone, you know. Residency and fellowship at Tufts Medical Center in Boston, where she was chief resident in neurology. And then she completed, I'm almost done, everybody, but this is someone also with a very impressive CV, and I want to do it justice. And then she completed her multiple sclerosis clinical fellowship at Brigham and Women's Hospital, Massachusetts General Hospital, and Harvard Medical School. Her research interests include multiple sclerosis, neuroimmunology, and medical ethics, about which, as I promised, we will be speaking to her. Now, we are about to go on to our very interesting interview, but let me tell you some exciting news. We have begun a new little show, a new 5-day-a-week show called Morning Coffee. So I am providing this little show now 5 days a week to start your morning. It's a brief audio podcast reflecting on perhaps the saints of the day, what time of year it is liturgically. I'll say whatever needs to be said about every day liturgically, and then briefly reflect on just one or two verses of scripture so that you have something to carry with you. I'm announcing this morning coffee show, which will only be available to subscribers on Patreon. So do subscribe. I think you will like to have something to listen to 10 to 15 minutes on your drive to work, perhaps, or while you're getting ready, making your coffee while you're still at home. So check that out. Morning Coffee with Sister Vassa, available on Patreon at this link. Do not hesitate, subscribe. I think you'll enjoy it. All right, everybody. Now, without further ado, let's move on to our interview with Dr. Alexandra Filippakis. Hello, Alexandra. It's so lovely to have you on our show.
Good morning, Sister Vassa. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm a huge fan of yours.
Thank you so much. I do realize what a busy schedule you have. So all of our viewers, I think I speak for all of them when I say we really appreciate you finding the time to share yourself with us. So here we go. I'll get right to my first question to you. You have shared with me in our correspondence that amidst your professional work and research in neurology, it is ethical issues that keep you awake at night, as you wrote, and particularly in the area of end of life care. You're faced, as you've told me, on a daily basis with some actively dying patients and with various options for alleviating their suffering, both via natural means, and I mean like your own words and your presence to the patient, and via medical means like administering morphine, which, as you've informed me, might hasten their death by some amount of time. But you're also faced with medical options for prolonging the life of the patient mechanically by various procedures and machines. So, could you share with our viewers how you personally deal with these issues on a practical level and intellectual level and also spiritual level, and how or whether your Orthodox Christian faith helps you to navigate them?
Of course. So, in my opinion, I would say that the most difficult part about being a physician is actually navigating these ethical issues that frequently come up in medicine. I would say, especially in my chosen field of neurology. Of course, every specialty has its own unique ethical dilemmas. But as a neurologist, what I'm most commonly faced with on a daily basis are these issues surrounding the end of life. For those of you who aren't, familiar with what a neurologist does, we take care of patients with a variety of diseases, including strokes, brain bleeds, epilepsy, ALS, muscular dystrophies, Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, Alzheimer's disease, and various other dementias, multiple sclerosis, which is my subspecialty, just to name a few, really. As you can see, this is a very uplifting specialty. So most of us see patients in the outpatient clinic setting, and these are lower acuity patients who present for follow-up, routine laboratory testing, imaging, neurologic examination. But most of us, to varying degrees, spend time in the hospital taking care of patients who are hospitalized for acute, emergent, serious, and often life-threatening issues. And it's really in this setting, often in the intensive care units, that we're really faced with death on a fairly regular basis. And I found over the years that death is really a complicated thing. And that might sound like an obvious statement, but not only emotionally and spiritually, but also medically. I think it goes without saying that we as physicians often co suffer with our patients, especially ones with whom we've forged a close relationship, whom we've followed for many years and sort of perhaps have watched a gradual progression of their disease. And I may be more of a softie than other physicians, as I'm told. But I personally find it difficult sometimes, not to shed a tear, to really feel these situations deeply. For example, when giving devastating news when diagnosing someone who's relatively young and has young children with a terminal illness, watching a human being breathe their last breath, um, legally pronouncing a death, watching family members grieving at the bedside, and even worse, trying to track down um, family members and friends of a deceased patient, only to find out that there are many people in this world who have nobody that cares about them. So I think situations like these evoke a natural human emotional response to some extent in all physicians, regardless of their religious background. What I think is more difficult to navigate from a medical ethical standpoint are the actual decisions surrounding someone's death. In 2019, we have a plethora of medical interventions at our disposal. We can administer electric shocks to somebody to restart their heart. We can breathe for somebody by intubating them and placing them on a ventilator or a breathing machine. We can even take it a step further and further facilitate oxygenation and gas exchange in the lungs by using a technique called ECMO. We can filter toxins from the blood in the setting of kidney failure, which is dialysis. We can feed somebody who's comatose through nasal, oral, or surgically implanted stomach tubes. We can insert all sorts of intravenous lines, arterial lines for medications, for hydration. There are tubes and catheters to collect urine and stool. I mean, really, just thinking about these, the last night of the things that the list goes on and on. And, it's only, we're only having, sort of new treatments and more procedures. So it's no longer what can we do? I feel like the question these days is what should we do? And is this something that will really benefit the patient in the long run? So when I make these decisions, I have to ask myself, is this intervention um, going to change the outcome? In other words, is this intervention medically futile? Am I causing more suffering for someone who will likely die regardless of what I do? And keep in mind that these sort of interventions that I listed are not comfortable. They cause pain, they cause suffering to the patient in and of themselves, even though they may prolong life. Um, and I also, need to think about: am I prolonging someone's inevitable death to make myself feel better that I've done something as a physician? And I think these are really the questions that I grapple with and do, like we said, keep me up at night because, I'm not always 100% sure that I've made the right decisions. I think we all like to reference cases, rare cases that we've had in the past where someone pulled through against the odds. And of course, as an Orthodox Christian, I believe in miracles and divine intervention. And I've witnessed this at times. However, I'm still a physician and a scientist, and I need to practice evidence based medicine to the best of my ability. And I need to quote accurate statistics to family members in order to inform their decision making. Um, and this is sort of where the difficulties lie. How do I deal with this? I think the short answer is that I pray. I pray for my patients, I pray for their families, and I pray that God grants me wisdom and discernment to try to make the right decisions. And I've made peace with the fact that I'm just a human being with flaws, with blind spots, with biases. And like everybody else, I make mistakes. I just pray that when I do make mistakes, they don't harm the patient. Uh, and I would say, through being an Orthodox Christian, my perspective on death is, I would say, radically different than most non religious physicians that I work with. And that, in my opinion, death is not the worst thing. Because as we know, Christ has trampled down death by his own death. So, in my belief that in God and in an afterlife, um, death is not the ultimate evil, and it really is treated as such. I think in sort of these in the medical field, talking to colleagues, just being in the hospital, it's like death is the worst thing, and we need to avoid it at all costs. And I don't agree with that. In my opinion, prolonged suffering is worse than death. Um, so I sort of try to think about it in this way. Of course, my first and foremost goal is to try to cure somebody, to help somebody, but I have to accept that sometimes I can't do that. So then I sort of shift my priorities to um, making this transition to the end of life peaceful, um, and as smooth as possible, and ensuring that patients have their spiritual and emotional needs met, that they are comfortable, and that they, pass with dignity. And this is through palliative care, hospice care, um, hospital chaplain programs. It's a complete paradigm shift. Um, and as you mentioned, this usually entails prescribing of medications like morphine, as you mentioned, to ensure the patient's comfort. However, there are unintended consequences of these medications. For example, with morphine and various pain medications and medications used for anxiety and breathlessness, they also cause respiratory depression and may hasten death in some cases. Now, it's hard to say how how hasten that death will be. Minutes, hours, days, a week. It's hard to know exactly, um, and I'm not sure that it's that important to know exactly because this sort of intervention is reserved for someone who is actively dying. And this is this example of this principle of double effect, which was, I think, even attributed back to Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, where the intention is good. The intention is to relieve suffering, and these sort of there are negative unintended effects, but that is not the motive. I don't want to shorten anyone's life, but it's hard for me to watch a patient in a bed, writhing in pain, gasping for air, and to sort of stand there as their physician and not do anything. Um, so, of course, the Orthodox Church doesn't have an official stance on this issue. But however, when I try to think about it theologically, and I'm not a theologian or anything, but I personally can't imagine that our merciful God wants his children, whom he created out of love, to suffer this way at the end of life when there are interventions that we can take to make them more comfortable. I just feel that my responsibility to patients doesn't end, um, at the point where I say, well, there's nothing else I can do for you. I think that we have to see it through literally to the end. And I just feel that that includes really really attending to somebody's death. And this is a hard thing to do, and this is not necessarily required, of physicians. I mean, what we are required to do is prescribe medications, check on the patient, and you could sort of disappear, continue your rounds, and wait for the nurse to call you and say, "Hey, I think this patient has passed. Can you come and pronounce?" But I sort of my personal calling is to not leave the bedside, and to really be there to, especially when people are alone. Um, and I just don't. I feel like nobody should die alone, and I have no problem sitting there and sort of sitting in for a family member, sitting next to somebody, holding their hand, reading to them, just sort of being there for them. And I don't know if they are aware. Sometimes you don't know if they know if you're there or not. Sometimes you have a feeling that you know physical touch may be sensed, sometimes in changes in vital signs. But regardless of that, I feel that that is something that God would want us to do. What I find that's tough in situations and end of life, and what causes this whatever you want to call it, moral injury or burnout or post-traumatic stress, whatever they're calling it these days in physicians, is in these situations when we're sort of forced to do something, um, or not do something that we don't believe is in the best interest of the patient. And this happens not uncommonly because these days many patients have advanced directives, and they've clearly written, in this case I would want this or I wouldn't want this. Or even more tricky, they don't have anything written down. They've never discussed this with a family member. And then you have family members coming in, who may be close to the patient, which may not be close to the patient, that are, of course, overcome with grief, overwhelmed, may not understand the medical situation that's going on, trying to make decisions. And I like to have many family meetings, and sometimes you can sort of uh, guide this conversation and just be realistic and sort of get through to families. And sometimes families are just very adamant that, no, I want you to do everything, and I want you to do this and do that and do that. And legally we have to do that. And I think that's tough, because what I find in these situations where I know that the patient doesn't have a long time,
Hmm.
has already gone through suffering, and the family is telling me, well, I want you to place this line, and I want you to place this drain, and I want you to do this, and I want you to keep that breathing tube in. That's what really hurts me deep down in my soul. I mean, there's been times where I've known that the patient's wishes were not in line with that. For example, a family told me, no, I want you to keep, my mom on the ventilator. So I would go in and check on the patient who was on the ventilator. We periodically wean down the sedation to perform neurologic exams. And there's been times where, a patient will look me right in the eye, tears coming down their eyes, and they'll say like, no, or stop. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing, emotional harm to this patient, who I think a lot of patients, if they have awareness at this time, sort of know this is it. And that's what really, really bothers me, is that when, even though I'm the physician, there are certain legal standards that I have to respect, family decisions, patient decisions. And I think when there's a disconnect, that's what I find, that's where I struggle.
Do you find that you also have to be sort of, well, you not only for legal reasons, but sort of a comforter to the family as well? I mean, when you have to come out and say the person has passed to the family, you're really, I don't know, that's, like a police officer who comes to the door
Right.
after there's been an accident, although this is different because you might be, I don't know, does the family blame you sometimes maybe? Because do they shoot the messenger sort of? But you're also the physician, so that's really tricky, right?
Right. It's tricky, and every situation is different because of the every family has different family dynamics. But what I try to do is sort of anticipate this. As soon as somebody comes into my care, I have family meetings at least once a day. Try to develop rapport. I think the most important thing is to develop rapport with the family. So there's some level of trust, to know that I'm working hard. We have the same goal. I care about your family member. And, sometimes, death is inevitable. So I think it really depends on how you approach the family. I think you have to be respectful, you have to be compassionate. Um, you have to accept some level of you know what may come across as rudeness sometimes, because people are grieving, and they may say something to you that's not so nice or insulting, but you have to sort of see where they're coming from. They're in this hospital setting that they're not familiar with. Their loved one is dying, and they're out of sorts, and you have to, forgive things that they may say and may not mean. And I think what I found is that if you let these things go, and you show that you truly are um, sorry, and you feel for them, and you feel for the patient, and you sort of let just compassion and kindness come through, you really can flip the situation that may look like it's going towards a confrontational perspective, confrontational sort of road. And I think that the more communication there is, and the more explanation there is, the better. um, I think people get upset when they don't understand what's going on, what the circumstances were, what we tried to do, what we didn't try to do. And I think really communication and kindness are really the key. So I've really it's something emotionally draining to do, but it's also something that it sounds weird to say enjoy doing, but this is something that I feel particularly called to speak with families in these situations, and this is something that I feel that I do well. In fact, some of my colleagues have, used to ask me like, "Hey, can you go talk to the family of my patient that just died?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't really. That's your patient." Because a lot of doctors are just not comfortable with death, which is strange to say, but it's the truth. And you can't just sort of ignore it and run away with it, sign the death certificate, and run down the hallway. I think there needs to be closure, there needs to be conversation, there needs to be uh, people need to be allowed to grieve, and it's okay to grieve with the family sometimes. And that doesn't make you, in my opinion, that doesn't make you less professional. And I found that families appreciate you showing that you also cared for these patients, because many of these patients you've had long-term relationships with. Sometimes we see them every 3 months more than their primary care physician. So
Right.
you get to know them, they send you Christmas cards, they send you pictures of their grandkids. So, it's also sad for us. And I think it's okay for us to show the family that we're also sad.
It strikes me, uh, many of the aspects of your work, that they're, I would dare say, it sounds very pastoral, like almost like a priestly service. And I mean that, similar to a priest, i- it's part of your job to, first of all, when you can, to restore people to life by, these healing methods that you have at your disposal, but also of accompanying people at their deaths, when their time has come. And I'm thinking of the church, often being described as a hospital, which does both these things, restores people to health and accompanies them at their deaths. So, my question to you is, do you, after years of medical work in your professional life, quote unquote, in the world,
Mhm.
do you find that that work beyond the walls of the church connects you more closely to the church, and perhaps particularly also to the priests of the church? Do you feel also that your church and her pastors uh, like connect more closely with you also, as someone who really makes decisions over life and death in her profession outside the church? um, do you feel somehow connected because, and supported? And by support I really just mean connected, like that registers somehow, that you're in the trenches doing
Right.
something also enlightened by your faith,
Mhm.
not as someone, not not as a church member, but it's like your church work as well, right?
Mhm.
So I don't know if this question makes sense to you, but I guess it's, do you feel this connection to church work, and that your church also, in the human beings, say in your concrete parish, um, also connects with you as someone with that kind of, mind-blowing responsibility.
Right. So this question definitely does make sense, and I think it's a good question. So I'll answer the first part first. And do I feel a closer connection to the church via this pastoral work? And I would say the answer is yes, but I have to tell you that it took me a while to sort of realize this, because when I first started, you know, practicing medicine, it was in my internship when was a junior resident, and I was really upset at the fact that my works, because we don't have any control over our hours during this training. So I was working on average 80 hours a week, nights, weekends, holidays, just in a constant state of exhaustion. And because of that, I felt I was physically separated from the church because I couldn't regularly attend services. Thankfully, we lived close to the Holy Cross School of Theology in Brookline, Massachusetts at that time. So sometimes I would be coming off a 24-hour shift in the morning, and I would just scoot in the back of the where the seminarians were having Orthodox, and I would just try not to fall asleep in the back pew. And I just felt very uh, disheartened, because as someone who, for her whole life just would go to every church service, and not because I was forced to, but because I wanted to, I felt that as a deep loss. So I almost started to resent sort of this decision, saying, "What? Why did I do this? This is taking me away from going to church. Is this worth it? What was this? Was this a good decision?" And I actually remember vividly a couple of years ago during Holy Week, and I was assigned to the night shift. I was on 14 days of nights in a row. It was 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So there's no way I could attend any Holy Week services because they start at 7 in most of the parishes around here, and I was sort of reported to the hospital 6:45. Um, and I was really upset. I was really down. I was in a funk. And I remember Holy Thursday calling my mom and just sort of venting and complaining and saying, "I can't believe this. It's Holy Thursday. I can't be in church. Like, I can't chant my favorite hymns. I can't, be at the Passion service." And, my mom was like, "Okay, calm down. What are you doing tonight? What are you doing in the hospital tonight?" And I was like, "Well, the usual. There's a woman upstairs, dying from, brain cancer, and I'm just, with her, and I'm, just checking in on her and holding her hand and like reading." She happened to be a spiritual woman. And I was, just reading to her and just, praying with her. And my mom was like, "Are you hearing yourself? You're complaining that you can't physically be in church to chant, but you are doing God's work there." And okay, at that moment, I was maybe not really receptive to it, because I just was so fixated that like I need to be in church. But it sort of took a while for me to sort of flip this idea on its head. Of I've always been familiar with the concept of the church being a spiritual hospital, but what I had to do to sort of make this work um, fulfilling, is to figure out a way to bring the church to the actual hospital, and to realize that even on the days that I wasn't able to physically be in the church and to receive the sacraments, that there was some sort of, as you said, pastoral work, that I was serving the church in some way. And what I ended up doing was, I think shortly after that, I had written down on this on this piece of paper that I still have in my wallet, actually, the scripture verse, Hebrews chapter 6, 10 to 12. I'll read it for you. "For God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love, which you have shown towards his name, and that you have ministered to the saints and do minister. And we desire that each one of you show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope until the end, that you do not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. So I had sort of meditated on that verse, kept it in my white coat pocket, and just try to remind myself, why am I here? And the conclusion that I came to is that I'm here to serve, and I don't see my role as physician as a role of power and authority, but rather as really as a servant. And I think this has really changed the way that I practice medicine. That I don't mind or get offended if a patient says, "Hey, can you get me a glass of water? Hey, can you reposition me?" And the things that are maybe traditionally not done by the physician, where uh, you know that may be the work of a nurse or a nurse's aide, or well, I think that I'm here to, do what I can medically, but also to serve all the needs of somebody. If someone needs company, someone needs me to sit with them, somebody wants me to pray with them, somebody wants me to get them a glass of water to feed them, I'm happy to do it. So I think I needed to shift this and to look at it as, instead of serving God at the chanter stand, I was serving God in the hospital. And every time I think of, why am I doing this? Is this worth it? And all these years of training, and loss of all my 20s basically, and missing family events and birthdays and anniversaries, what why? And I think that's really what it boils down to. And also, what also I would just read over and over was the 38th chapter of the Wisdom of Sirach, which talks about, actually really tells you about the role of a physician. And I think it's really interesting because I'll uh, I'll read it for you. So it says, this is chapter 38. Honor the physician with the honor due him, and also according to your need of him, for the Lord created him. Healing comes from the Most High, and he will receive a gift from the King. The physician's skill will lift up his head, and he shall be admired in the presence of the great. The Lord created medicines from the earth, and a sensible man will not loathe them. Is not water made sweet by wood, that its strength might be known? And he gave skill to men, that he might be glorified in his wonders. By them he heals and takes away pain, a druggist making a compound of them. God's works are never finished, and from his health is upon the face of the earth. My son, do not be negligent when you are sick, but pray to the Lord, and he will heal you. Depart from transgression, and direct your hands aright, and cleanse your heart from every sin. Offer a sweet smelling sacrifice and a memorial of the finest wheat flour, and pour oil on your suffering as if you are soon to die. And keep in touch with your physician, for the Lord created him, and do not let him leave you, for you need him. There is a time when success is also in their hands, for they will pray to the Lord to give them success in bringing relief and healing for the sake of preserving your life. So this sort of, to me, is sort of the almost like a charter statement of being a Christian physician. It's remembering that um, it's God's work through you. You're just an unworthy vessel. We have to remember that, not to you know get cocky or have egos, that everything we do, and when there's a good outcome, it's not us, it's God. That we have to pray for our patients, that we are there to serve them and to minister to them. And this is something that really spoke to me, and I have this in my office as a reminder, with an icon of the Holy Mercenaries, and that little piece of paper that I still keep in my pocket, that Hebrews, that really sort of helps me remember, especially then when I wasn't able, as I am now, to more regularly attend services, that this is still church related, as you say.
It's helpful, I think, for many of our viewers to hear your testimony, of how you processed that. This kind of, for many lay people, I think they tend, many of our lay people in the Orthodox churches, I think, tend to think of, not explicitly liturgical activities as somehow less than, like not really prayer, or they're missing services, as do mothers of small children often. Breastfeeding in some cases, takes up uh, throughout the if they have many small children, this can last for years, that they're always taken out of participating in services as they would like. And I don't know, I could name probably many fields, but I know several of the zillions watching who are regularly in touch with me are nurses, that work nights sometimes, that will miss important services, and sort of, forget that we're not just, we, we're not just, going, making money, and uh, acting of our own volition, but that there is such a thing as vocation, and that to think of oneself as one who is sent, and the Lord says to all of his followers in every generation that he will send us forth. So this being sent, the sense of mission, this sense of mission, and of being humbled by that you have shared with us, is so empowering, I think, and humbling at the same time. That might, that I think we need to see a little bit more in lay vocations, and not to just sort of think that this is not an activity or a completely legitimate church action
Mhm.
that you are sent, to do. So anyway, I wanted to say a few words about that, even though I don't need to add anything to what you've shared with us. But there's it's very traditional in Orthodoxy to see, like real prayer or real spirituality, say, only in monasticism, you
Right.
know and it's the damaging part, because I don't care if people elevate monastics, go ahead. I don't think that this one is elevated for obvious reasons, but uh, I think that it's important for people not to think, well, were I to escape to the wilderness or live on a mountaintop, then I would have real connection with God. And maybe I will. Maybe there's this silent uh, hope that maybe they will outlive their spouse.
That's my husband's joke.
That's his joke. That maybe hubby uh, will go before me, and then I can become a nun, and then I'll do all of my praying. That's the damaging part, though, because I say it as a dark joke, but it's like lay people sometimes are delaying their connection with God because they're like, I'm not doing the real deal. But no, you are doing something that someone needs to do, because if everybody were standing right now in church, nobody would be doing that. They wouldn't be manning this fort, or you
Did
know
Harry put you up to saying this? No, just
no, but I've talked about this a lot, actually. But
right, right.
this kind of attitude that you have certainly put to rest, with no, you aren't. It's funny how people with different vocations will see the grass as greener on the other side,
Yes.
of what someone else is doing, but what you are doing, what this amazing thing that you're doing, well, somebody else is doing an amazing thing somehow. And sometimes this kind of self-offering also involves the sacrifice of some of our church time. And
Right,
I don't know why it works that way, but it works that way in many fields, you know
right.
and
Really,
maybe that's something we have to learn. We have to learn not to just see service to God in, I mean, of course we see it in liturgical services, but um, it's also should be, I think, liturgical and enlightened by faith, those things beyond the church's walls. But
right.
obviously, for a woman, I think there are these strange implications that I see for you having such responsibility, involving questions that might contribute to, the outcome of life or death. And so it's just strange because in the church, you're not, and it's not, this is, I don't want, we all know that this will be, it's a heavily politicized and divisive issue. But all I'm saying is that I want to say that there is a big discrepancy between the amount of responsibility and pastoral, I would say, decision making that you could possibly have, which is, I'm not saying it's bad or good. I'm saying there is very large discrepancy between when you walk into the church, the kinds of responsibilities you could possibly even have because you're a woman. And that's just not true in the medical profession. So I don't know, is it bad or good? Well, it's a thing. It's a thing. And so I'm just putting it out there so that our viewers right now can live chat about it and get into arguments with each other.
I think that is something that is true, and of course whether it's good or bad, that's subjective. But I have to say that it's something that is quite noticeable for me as a woman who does also serve the church in during its services.
Let's get to that, the chanter thing. So, but continue your thought. I didn't want to, I have to also think about our time issues, but
Exactly.
do finish that thought, please.
Sure. So I do feel that there is this disconnect, as you say, where at work, you know, I am sort of, leading a team, making these decisions, providing this pastoral care, even, praying over bodies of the deceased as I don't even know if I'm supposed to do that, but I do that.
You don't wear an epitrachilion though, right?
No, no, I don't.
Then it's
just
okay. Then it's okay. Don't do that. That always, I had to learn that the hard way, but just don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, I keep that at
That
home.
was a
Yeah.
joke. That was a joke, my Zillion. I never did that. I don't have an epitrachilion.
And then I just, I do feel that disconnect because now when I enter the church, where I also want to and feel called to serve, I feel that sometimes it's sort of an ongoing um, struggle as to sort of how much can I be involved in these liturgical services. And I am a chanter and reader, not ordained or anything like that, but I feel like that's sort of the, obviously I can't really go any further than that, but it's tough because that's may or may not be well received, and it's just, you know uh, I'm not gonna lie. I'll be honest with you and say that as a woman, I do wish I could do more in the church, but I understand the limitations. So it's strange to have two worlds where I'm trying to um, unite them, but in one sphere I have restrictions, and in the other sphere I don't. So it's a little bit strange to sort of have this disconnect.
Yeah, one Orthodox woman shared with me, actually, she shared it in a public lecture at Fordham. Her name is Anne, Anne, this amazing Anne who works at Holy Cross doing.
Yes, yes, yes.
And so she said, she was raised in this household where her father and mother would say you could be anything you want to be,
Right.
but not in the church.
Exactly.
And it's fine. Again, some viewers might take this as some kind of, I don't know, I don't know what you'll take it as, my friends. I wish we could talk about issues without them being polarizing, because what Alexandra is witnessing to, I don't think is coming from some kind of a, place of some kind of political agenda. It's coming from a deep place of who you are in this world, who you've been called to be, and where it's simply because the world has changed in many ways that you're raised to, indeed, to you're told, oh, you can be, you just work hard, you can be anyone you want to be. And then in church, I'm not saying that we should, nobody has endless possibilities, and everybody does have vocation, and there is a place for things in church, and I don't feel resentful. I really don't feel resentful about this. I feel that there is a certain, because of the changed times and the changed work that women do in various spheres, I feel like uh, there's something, going on that some women do feel resentful about. Actually, many women, and people don't really want to hear this, but
Right.
I know that many women feel like, well, when I come to church, it's like, you're not allowed to go here, you're not allowed to go here, and God forbid you go there, because no women allowed there, where all the interesting stuff happens.
Exactly.
And so, and no, you can, you can't hold the boys can hold the candles when you're little.
Right. Right.
And you're when I was little, my little brother, who was younger than me, was done the Stiharion when he was only 3, and
Yeah.
my mom had it made, and it was all very. We took a lot of pictures, even back when people didn't take lots of pictures, and there was, for the girls, really sort of, if you don't have a musical ear. Um, I do have a musical ear, so I could sing, and I eventually became choir director. But just because there's no one else, as usual, then we sort of do stuff because no one else does it.
We're always filling a need, it seems.
Right, which is, glory be to God, that's fine, right? But the fact is that the church, nobody talks about this, but church canons forbid, forbid that anyone sing or read in church who is not ordained. We don't even have singer ordinations in the Russian Orthodox Church. That's sort of, it's the same, actually, right? I looked it up. It's the same right as the ordination of a reader, but it's not done. We will be, I don't know actually when we'll air this interview. I think we'll air it after I air the one with Susan Ashbrook Harvey. Professor Ashbrook Harvey was ordained to be a chanter because there was a little window after the Rhodes Conference on Women in Orthodoxy. I don't know if that's the exact title, but there was a decision of that conference at which there were Orthodox bishops that they were suggesting it's not like a pan-Orthodox decision. Anyway, excuse me. Anyway, I have to edit out something. I sort of burped. So they, in this decision, of one of the decisions of that conference was to suggest that females or women be ordained as chanters. So anyway, right after that, in 1989, she was ordained, and with her 3 others, or at least at the same time. I don't know if it was the same, at the same time. So anyway, and then they stopped doing it. It was like, oops, that. I guess, I don't know. It probably awakened, some sleeping dogs, as they say.
Sure.
So, but the funny thing is, now all over the place we do have, except apparently in the Greek churches around the corner from me, they don't have women singing. There's like 3.5 fat guys, that are in black cassocks, and
Right. Right.
they stand around and sing. But in the Russian Orthodox Church, certainly choir directors, women all over that. But it's not canonical for them to be doing that. And I'd like to remind everyone just to, that's not a very feminist stance of me, right? But they shouldn't be doing that because it's against the canons. It's Canon 15 of Laodicea. People, look it up if you're into that. There's everyone's like, sure, sister.
They're frantically Googling right now.
Let me get my canonical codex. Oh yeah, of course, just Google it. So anyway, I really went overtime with this question, but it is fascinating, and what you're saying is not. I don't hear it as some kind of resentment. I mean, you're just. I think that you're noting that you're sort of not. I wouldn't even say, it's not like you're waiting to be praised for what you do, but you certainly need, like everybody does, support, and for your vocation to, like, you take your place in church, but you have a specific vocation. Like, you're not just, you're doing this amazing work, and you need support. How can you manage? That's why I asked, do you get support? Because you did mention in only one sentence like PTSD, but I don't know how one wouldn't have PTSD like big time with people just dropping like flies around you. I've never been present when somebody died, and so I can't even imagine. But you, the incredible loss, and I don't know. I can't. And as a woman, I don't know. I don't know because I don't belong to your world, but I don't know if male physicians deal with this differently. Uh, Whether you are motherly to people, that your patients. But I just think that it has to be really hard.
It is, and I would say it's definitely personality dependent, and it really depends on the comfort level of the physician, how comfortable they are with death, and how involved they want to be. There really is a sort of a spectrum. In terms of support, during these years of training, where you know, not gonna lie, things were tough. It was rough. I mean, there were days where I was just like, I think I'm gonna quit and I'm going to go to a monastery, or I'm going to go to get a PhD in theology or something.
Yeah, you were like, I'm going to take the easy road, man.
Sorry, that may have been offensive. I did not mean it to be
No,
offensive.
no, no.
But I held that to a higher standard, as you say, monasticism on a pedestal.
Yeah.
Um, just like get out of the just constant beeping and paging, and just go out on a mountain and just pray. um but it was really, I could not have gone through this without the support of my husband, who, obviously knows me as a person and knows my heart. Also has a medical scientific background to be able to understand, the situation, and has the patience to just listen and listen and listen. And also who shares the same faith, and would help me sort of work through these issues. At work, I was able to sort of vent and talk about things with other physicians, most of whom were not religious at all. But then that's just sort of a different therapy, if you will, just talking to someone who really does the same thing every day. Like, how do you process this? How does this make you feel? What do you do? Just sort of, the people who you're in the trenches with. Um, uh, I found that helpful as well. You know, it, I think it would be nice to have also actual pastoral from a priest, support in these issues. But I think this is difficult because, not for any fault of any priest, but I think, first of all, not only priests, but I think most people don't realize the trauma, I think, that the physicians go through. Because, of course, when you think of death at the forefront, you think of course, the patient who died and their family. And you don't often think of, that doctor that comes in here and there and checks for a pulse and signs the paperwork, and that's sort of we're sort of a side player. So it's easy to overlook, what goes on, how we're affected emotionally and spiritually by these things. And I think also most priests don't really know, unless they're, explicitly told or interested to learn about what this actually entails, and how involved it is. And also just the medical intricacies of this decision making. It's hard to ask for guidance from somebody about, did I make the right decision, when they don't know anything about medicine.
Right.
um, so it's the ideal would be to be like, have someone who's a priest and a doctor, to that would be, the best support. But I'm sure they exist, but I personally don't know any. um, and I think that, that just sort of makes it a little bit difficult, and especially in a time where, at least for me, when I wasn't physically present in church as regularly, and I was, um, not going to my home parish because I was living in the city, and the seminary chapel was daily open. So I wasn't having as much sort of constant interaction with the priest. Where now, my parish priest is wonderful, and we talk, almost daily. Sometimes he checks in. where it was sort of a different time, and I wasn't attending that parish at that time. So
Your priest is very attentive to you.
yes, yes, yeah, he is. We didn't have this relationship at that time because I wasn't. I live in the suburbs now, and I was living in the city. We weren't so much. I mean, he's known me since I was, young. But I was sort of removed from that parish during the time of medical school and training, and also while I was training to learn Byzantine music with Telly, he was at a different parish that was 15 minutes away. So I actually was attending that parish while I was training
For
to
the
learn.
folks at home, I have to clarify that Dr. Filippakis you studied Byzantine chant with Telly, who is Professor Aristotle Papanikolaou of Fordham University, who has been interviewed on this award-winning show, my friends. Why is it award-winning? Well, because you can win awards. See, in fact, Alexandra has the award, the coveted cup. Forget what it's called.
Franz Josef.
It's the Emperor Franz Josef's trophy for acts of heroic distinction. That's what it is. Well, it has such a heavy name, but that's what they named it back in the day. All right, listen, I have to stop because we went a little overtime, but I don't know. It was fascinating, and we didn't get to the church music question, so maybe we'll have to do another time an interview about that and whether you have organs, because I told people that you played the organ back in high school and college days in your church, the Greek Orthodox Church. But then what, they got rid of it or you stopped using it?
So the choir sort of dissolved at our parish is sort of an older immigrant parish, and it's sort of thinned out over the years. So with
what you have less people in church, fewer people in church?
We have less people in church, so the choir sort of slowly phased out, and currently we just have what you would see in a traditional Orthodox church in Greece. The I'm the old fat guy chanting at the front of the church with another with an actual a man and we do the traditional chant, and assuming, actually I shouldn't assume this, but I think to clarify this sort of difference between chanting and singing in a choir, because from what I understand, in the Russian church it's Western music on a staff that's a 4-part harmony. Yeah. So the traditional Greek, when I say Byzantine music and Byzantine chant, I mean these squiggly lines.
You mean like Pavugar?
Exactly.
I can't get those strange intervals.
Exactly. So learning like a different language, and it takes time to first of all learn the notation, learn the scales, learn the theory, and to sort of practice it. And the thing is, like in the US, chanters aren't coming out of the woodwork. It takes time and to do this properly, where it's easier to have a choir. You get a bunch of people together to read. People know Western music, they can read music on a staff, but who's going to take time out of their life to learn what these squiggly lines mean?
I've got a few books with Greek musical notation as well. I wanted to show it off, but it's in the other room, so I won't. Right. So, but I find as difficult it is for Russian ears to listen to Greek music, even though it's Byzantine chant, even though some people like it, and it's. I think I shared with you that.
Don't the Russians have something similar called Znameny chant?
Yes, exactly. There was this very, very abrupt switch. Like they completely abandoned that in the mid 17th century and totally fell in love with this, what was called Italian music in church. It came to Muscovy via Kiev. That was this sort of bridge between East and West. But anyway, but they were, there's a history to it as well, because they were battling the uniate sort of attractiveness of their music out in the Ukrainian, region.
Right.
And so they battled it, as did, back in the 4th century, some of the churches battling the Arian uh, heretics. The Arians had very attractive music, and they used music to attract people. So the church would copy their music and
Interesting.
use it to attract people. Because there were a lot of controversies. Actually, there were monastic voices throughout the 4th, 5th centuries about having melodic music at all in liturgy. It was
Right.
like singing, it was considered perhaps okay for in the cathedrals in the world, but not in a
Mhm.
monastic setting and so forth. I mean, that was, that crowd was after a while outnumbered. I can't exaggerate that there were a lot of people that were that hard liner, hard lined about this. But anyway, fascinating. And I find it fascinating that when I hear Greek chanters, I made a joke. Oh, it's a few, sort of late middle aged fat guys standing, in
But
there.
you're not. It's not far from the truth.
But one thing I'll say is that they, as far as I have observed, are very into it. And this is not just someone who does this as a hobby or is not completely, sometimes his whole body is a little bit not
Yes.
dancing, but involved
Yes.
in the music and the words. Whereas we do have, sometimes really spectacular choirs in big Russian cathedrals.
Mhm.
And it's not rare, that some of the singers, and they often get paid,
Mhm.
aren't even faithful. I've been in parishes where we had not baptized people singing because they have voices,
Oh,
that
wow.
are nice. And so, and there's stuff that goes on, it's like the choir is sometimes leads a life of its own, not
Right.
really into liturgy per se.
Right.
They'll, there's whenever there are like long readings or something, they'll leave the church and have a little rehearsal, like during the hours that the
Right.
Russians still read. I know the Greeks aren't really big on reading the hours.
We got to bring that back.
No, it's the time in the Russian church where people do other things. Like there's the background reading of the hours and someone sweeping the floor. There's people in line for confession, putting up their candles, arguing in back of the church about who took my seat or whatever. But nobody, even the priest, is not listening to the hours because he's doing the protheses, the
Right.
prosody.
Right.
You don't really know, but see, that's a different story from what we're actually talking about. But what I want to say is that it's interesting to me that the singing somehow has become very often, of course it's not true about everybody, and people are going to write to me and say how their choir is so into liturgy, whatever,
Right.
but it's oftentimes the case that somehow the church singing culture, uh, yes, unfortunately divorced from somehow even the church.
Right.
I wonder whether it's this that our church a little bit has dropped the ball with church singing, in the sense that for external reasons, maybe something's been sacrificed. Even
Mhm.
the fact that this canon that only the ordained can sing and chant, which is expressing a concern for there to be seriousness and direction in
Right.
ministry.
Prayerful singing. Right.
Yeah, because they're leading the whole congregation in their
Right.
prayer. And
Right.
if those people are not, really connected, and it's sort of arbitrary, because it is arbitrary for someone to be allowed to sing without them needing to have any sort of credentials. Or I don't mean credentials, I mean, it's a church ordination is also an election.
Right.
You are privileged to be doing this ministry, but
Right.
all you need is some external thing like a nice voice. Sometimes deacons, I think, are ordained only for their voice in the Russian church too. Like everything else seems like, all right, well, I don't know. So these are things that people know, that go on. But there is, I think, something to be learned from the Greek uh, ethos, I would say,
Mhm.
in the Greek chanters. And
Right.
that's not so attractive to our ears, as I said, but one can get used to it.
Right, right. It's just, it's the sound is it's not a Western sounding. These are, chromatic scales that in people that are listening to Western music, it sounds a little bit foreign. And especially, when we chant these longer, these what are called like papatic hymns that are sort of drawn out, the communion hymn or the cherubic hymn, where you got one sentence and we're chanting it for 10 minutes, and that
When you start up with the Teddy Rem and something that just doesn't
exactly.
at all, then
Exactly. That, so, we did a Teddy Dem last Sunday, and then I saw, the eye rolling from no, nobody in the outside of the monasteries wants to hear Teddy Dems apparently.
no,
So, it's part of it is practical. You got to give the priest time to do his prayers and do what he has to do. But and then it's balancing, not you know boring the parishioners to death with these long melodies that as chanters we're like, wow, this is beautiful, this is great, we're going to do stanitsa and we're going to do karamani, we're going to do this and we're going to do the teddy rems, and you get all caught up in it and you realize nobody cares about about these things, and they're thinking like, what are they saying? They've been saying the same syllable for like 2 minutes, and so it's a balance,
no.
where
But the thing, I don't know if people listening to this know about the Teddy Rem, but there's other. What's the other one? Nana, like
oh and then yeah, there's all these other syllables like nena no like
yeah, it's explained sometimes by Byzantine writers to be like, like a child,
like
just
a lullaby.
yeah, or a child, before a child can speak, sort of cooing to God, like that
Right.
children in his children in God's eyes. But the thing is, I don't know what the term is for it, but it happens all over.
The term is kratima in Greek.
Fatima.
It's
Okay, so it's when the syllables are repeated that don't mean anything, but they have a melody. Now,
right.
in popular music, say, lie la lie, lie la lie,
Right.
lie lie la lie, lie la lie, and they didn't even mean lie, like Simon and Garfunkel.
Right.
They, I grew up thinking it's like someone
Right.
somebody
Right.
lying, but it's not. Or da na 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 da na, like very popular songs that
Right.
have people, sing along to that. What is it? Like why there's I don't know, there's something in people because you can't really explain music either in the
Right.
first place. Who first thought of like just melodies, like there
Right.
was, that in ancient Greek philosophy, like the Pythagoreans would have all these theories about some
Right.
divine elements in music and intervals. There's mysteries revealed through this.
Right.
Now
Right.
there is something mysterious. There is something to, about just singing without the words. And this is where, something like playing a musical instrument, because a musical instrument doesn't have the capacity to be reasonable.
Right.
Um, People will say, "Oh, that's why in the Orthodox Church," which it's not true that we never had instruments, right? But and it's in the Psalms, and
Yeah, exactly.
there isn't really, even though we explain it and say, well, we don't have musical instruments because of that, because they can't express words. Well, that's just not true. We don't have organs because the Catholics do. I think that's the main reason. But we got church bells from the West, right?
Right.
Listen, I really have to stop talking because I'm sorry. It's delightful to talk to you. I hope we talk again. And I'm saying goodbye to everybody. Would you like to say goodbye to our viewers?
Goodbye, Zillions. Thank you for having me, and I hope I didn't bore you too much.
No, I don't think anybody was bored. All right, everybody. Bye. See you next week. Same time, same place.